October 23, 2013. Yesenia Suarez and her two children, Talia Otto and Michael Elijah Otto, are reported as missing from their home in Deltona, Florida.
We're trying to do everything that we can, use all of our resources out there to figure out where could they be. Again, not often that you're going to have a mother with her two kids fall off the face of the earth.
The detective's suspicions center around Yesenia's husband, Luis Toledo.
Luis Toledo is the suspect, but as of now, we're working as a missing person of his wife and two kids.
During the investigation, it is revealed that Toledo had suspected that his wife, Yesenia, was being unfaithful.
He accused her of having an affair.
Luis going to her place of business the day before she disappeared. He was there, in a sense, to confront her about this affair that Yesenia was having.
This was all over the news. I mean, you have a mother and her two children missing. We had a large search party that people came from all over the state to assist us with trying to find these bodies. I mean, we were hopeful that we'd find them alive.
With no sign of the missing victims, investigators are trying to piece together what happened to an innocent mother and her two young children. Did they run away from Luis Toledo after an argument? Or was their disappearance the work of an envious, green-eyed killer? Deltona, Florida. Felicita Nieves is trying to call her daughter, 28-year-old Yesenia, for their usual morning catch-up.
We used to talk every day at 7 in the morning. 7 in the morning was like, Mom, I'm getting the kids ready, go to school, then go to work. And I didn't hear from her. You know, I started calling, nothing.
With no response from Yesenia, Felicita reaches out to her daughter's workplace.
And they told me that she said she was going to work from home. I called the school and nothing.
The school said that the children had not arrived that day.
This is not right. I felt something was too funny. And I called my husband. I said, look, I know something's going on.
Felicita also tries to contact Yesenia's husband, Luis Toledo, but gets no response. Growing concerned, Felicita alerts the police and sets off to drive to Yesenia's home a short distance away.
I flew and I called the cops to tell the cops to wait for me there. And when I got there, I knocked on the door. But then all of a sudden the cops came.
I was a detective in the major case unit. I was contacted by my then supervisor about a missing female and her two children. I in turn responded to where they live, which was a house in Deltona, Florida.
Deltona is a very large residential community. It is, I'd say, about 120,000 people now in a small city. It's a lot of juvenile population there, which turns into juvenile crimes, into street gangs, and all that stuff.
And I got debriefed by detectives, law enforcement officers, got somewhat of a rundown, names of who was involved. Yesenia Suarez, Talia Otto, Michael Otto, they were the children, and that a man by the name of Luis Toledo, who is the husband of Yesenia and the stepfather of the two children, was the person that we believe last saw her alive.
By the time he was in his teens, 15, 16, 17, he already had crimes on his record: a home invasion robbery, a burglary. He was jailed for shooting a gun in the direction of a person. In 2008, he was paroled from prison, and a year later, he met Yesenia Suarez at a street fair. Supposedly, there was some kind of fracas, and fists were flying, and something had hit Yesenia. And here comes Luis Toledo, picks her up, moves her out of the fray, goes with her to the hospital to make sure that she's all right. And it sounds like a Disney movie. Here is your knight in shining armor coming literally to your rescue when you feel you are in peril. And the two soon started dating.
We were a happy family, laughing, you know, outings together, Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthday. When my grandkids were born, I was always there.
Talia was 9 years old. Michael was 8. They were born 10 months apart. Some people call them the twins. They were born so close together. They just sound like great kids.
We used to live in the same neighborhood. I was my daughter's best friend, let's put it that way. I never agree with that relationship. Since the beginning, I didn't like the person, and I used to tell my daughter I didn't like him, but they're free of will of picking whoever they want. So I ended up accepting them. It was only a 4 years relationship. They lived for 2, and then they married for 2. He started going to church too. They got baptized the day they got married, which was 2 years before the incident.
The couple had been married only a year or two when the wheels started to come off. Luis Toledo was not as attentive at Barber College. He was not as attentive to the kids at home.
I didn't like the way sometimes he used to talk to the kids, but I used to say to my daughter, hey, Mom, please, don't start, da-da-da. So I said, okay, it's your daughter. And I always used to say, I hope nothing ever happened to you. I hope nothing ever happened to you.
He had been associated to a gang here in Florida, a gang called the Latin Kings, and one of my colleagues had dealt with him in the past.
Latin Kings is one of the largest street and prison gangs in the country. They stem from prisons to communities. They're all over the place. Deltona, Florida has a large Hispanic population. A lot of people from New York, Puerto Rico, and the Latin King group that Semi, or Luis Toledo, was involved in is from New York, and they're the bloodline Latin Kings. And they were one of the most organized criminal gangs in Volusia County. The captain at the time, over investigations, brought it to my attention and asked if I happened to know Mr. Luis Toledo because he had some gang involvement. It just so happened that I knew Mr. Toledo very well. I was a gang investigator prior to, and Luis Toledo was one of the gangs that I investigated, and I grew a relationship with Mr. Toledo. When I first met him, he went by Semi. It was never Luis Toledo, it was never Toledo, it was always Semi. And the reason why he had Semi was because he was like a semi-truck, right? He was big, bulky, and he was extremely aggressive and fast. He was a boxer for the Latin Kings. He trained the Latin Kings in boxing. So he's one of those guys you didn't want to come across in a dark alley. And he had a very hot temper. He was very strong. So when he hit you like a semi-truck. So Luis Toledo had a high ranking in the Latin Kings, not only in the state of Florida, but throughout the nation.
He was the number one, in the Latin Kings, and apparently he stopped doing that. And then I heard he was an informer.
He was a criminal, right? My job is to put criminals in jail. But there's an understanding, and a respect for how we kind of carried our business with each other. He was in and out of jail, in and out of prison. When he got out of jail the last time, he kind of said, hey, I have a family now. I'm going to stay out of the criminal side. Because again, Latin Kings are a criminal street gang. There's nothing illegal about being a criminal gang. What he was doing was he was still a Latin King. He was still going by his manifesto. He was still having meetings, attending Latin King meetings, but he was stepping back from the criminal side. He was being more of a father figure, I would say, to the Latin Kings, and he was concentrating on his family at the time.
Even as Toledo attempts to distance himself from the Latin Kings, Felicita is still on edge over his marriage to her daughter.
People had the right to change, that people changed. And that's one thing she used to throw at me. Well, Mommy, people change, I say, yeah, but because they change, you don't have to be with somebody like that, That I never agreed, but I accepted him because that's what she wanted.
As time went on and Yesenia's career seemed to be more successful, I'm not quite certain if it weighed on him or not. Again, he was trying to better himself. It became kind of clear that while he was doing some things for the household to help the household, Yesenia thought that he could be doing more. She perceived it as him not pulling his weight, him not trying.
In fact, he spent a lot of time playing video games with a neighbor. And so you can imagine Yesenia, who would come home from work, still had homework to do for her college degree. Her kids are doing their homework, and her husband is playing video games late into the night, not happy about this.
She's doing all this, and he's doing nothing, and I think that started to drive a wedge in their relationship. And then ultimately, it got to the point where he becomes aware or he becomes suspicious that Yesenia is probably seeking the attention of a man, most likely someone that she works with.
So she's, paying for the entire lifestyle. He's staying at home to supposedly be a stay-at-home dad, but he's not taking care of the kids. So she is expected to do everything in the relationship, and then the minute she's not attentive to his needs, it appears that he becomes, jealous and assumes it must be that she's attending to someone else's needs.
The day before her disappearance, Toledo starts to strongly suspect that Yesenia is having an affair with her co-worker Kevin, and he decides to confront her over this at her job.
I know Semi very well. He's a very jealous person. He has a very hot temper.
I asked him, I said, Lewis, you have your suspicion, okay, great. Again, that's not uncommon for people in relationships, especially people that are having a rough time in a relationship. But what makes you think, or what do you have that solidified what your suspicion was? And he says, well, I put this tracker on her phone where when she would get messages, he was able to know what her messaging was and her conversations would be. When his suspicion was what it is, it's just confirmed by this spying type of apparatus that he put on Yesenia's phone without Yesenia, of course, knowing. That led to Lewis going to her place of business the day before she disappeared and then having that domestic violence incident over there.
Toledo storms into the building and makes a scene, confronting Yesenia in the busy office workplace. Yesenia ushers him into an empty room in an effort to keep the fight private, but as his jealousy and rage hits a boiling point, Toledo strikes Yesenia, slapping her across the face. The police are called to the office to apprehend Toledo, but he flees before they arrive on the scene.
And then the next day, started the investigation. He was subsequently arrested on that domestic violence charge.
Following the confrontation, Yesenia spends the evening at her mother's home.
She was gonna stay in my house that night, but he came to my house that day too, and we talked, and I told him, Luis, you know, you guys can talk it over. I mean, yeah, but you cheated on me. I said, well, you cheated on her too, you know, you guys can forgive each other, get some time, get some space. Then he left. She was supposed to stay in my house that night, but then she wanted to go to her house. She ended up leaving around 8 p.m. on October 22nd, 2013. And that's the last time I saw my daughter.
October 2013, 28-year-old Yesenia Suarez and her 2 young children have disappeared. Yesenia's mother, Felicita, has filed a missing persons report and is heading to her daughter's home alongside the police. As they arrive, Yesenia's husband, Luis Toledo, makes an appearance.
Lewis was rolling up in a vehicle, and she became kind of confrontational with Lewis, knowing the background between Lewis and Yesenia.
And I told him it was my daughter. He said she left last night. I said, where? Where's my daughter?
When questioned, Toledo tells Felicita he has no idea where Yesenia and her 2 children are. He mentions that they had taken off the previous night and he hasn't seen them since. The police decide that a search of the home may shed some light on their location.
The cops go into the house, and what they find is nothing. There's nobody there. There's evidence of the family, the kids' backpacks are there, but there's no kids. And there's also, the first thing the police notice when they go in is a very strong smell of a cleaner. They think it is like pine sol. And why is that? Why is this the overpowering smell? And they begin to find some very unsettling things. What they see is evidence that something violent happened. They find drops of blood, a lot of them in the master bathroom. And they wonder, where did this blood come from? Whose blood is it? They find evidence that the bathroom had been cleaned up and wiped down. And of course, that raised their concerns and their suspicions about what had happened and who did it.
So coupled with what we knew the day prior, Lewis and Yesenia had a domestic violence incident. We knew from Yesenia's mother that Lewis and Yesenia were having marital problems, that they had been at her house the night prior talking about their issues. Yesenia and her mother would talk every morning. At this point, when we got involved, it was probably mid-morning, and that had not happened. Something was not right. And so given the totality of circumstances, and knowing a little bit about Lewis's history, that he had been a high-ranking member in a criminal gang that is known for violence, all these things were just suspicious.
The police decide to take Luis Toledo in for questioning.
We left that scene because my assignment at the time was to go and interview Lewis and try to get as much information as I could from him that would help out anything that was happening on the scene in Deltona.
My name is Investigator Pat Nord. I work for the Lewis County Sheriff's Office. And I want to talk to you today about some missing people.
My job was to get as much information as I could from Lewis in terms of timeline. We knew from Yesenia's mother when Yesenia left that house, and she happened to live down the street from where Yesenia and Lewis lived. So now we got to fill in. What happened between the time when Yesenia left to the time where now Yesenia's mother showing up at the home and having this conversation with Louis Toledo?
I sat down with the captain and the lieutenant at the time, and they were like, hey, we're working this missing person investigation. Louis Toledo is the suspect, but as of now, we're working it as a missing person of his wife and 2 kids. And when they told me that, I had a gut feeling, and I told them straight up, I was like, you're not gonna find them. And they're like, what do you mean by that? And I was like, well, I've known Louis Toledo for a long time. If something happened, it was either gang related or he lost it and killed him. I was there to build the rapport with Semi just because we had that ongoing relationship. This way he kind of felt some trust in the situation. Sergeant Pagliari was there more for the investigative side to get the questions answered and try to get some closure in the case.
I want to talk to you. I need your help on this case. Your wife is missing, and the 2 children are missing. Are they your children or her children?
They're my kids, because I raised them, and I'm biologically.
Okay.
I did not want to go down a road where it seemed like I might be judgmental because I knew about his criminal background. Truth be told, when these kinds of investigations, whether it's a homicide investigation or a missing person investigation, a lot of times law enforcement looks at the people that are closest to them. So in this case, the closest person to Yesenia and the kids would have been her husband. So to get out of that stereotype of, well, you know, I'm the husband, I must be the prime suspect, so on and so forth, that was not the line of question. That was not the tone I wanted to set. But the curveball to this whole thing, the thing that kind of changes the dynamic of the interview on that first day, is when I find out that there was a neighbor, and his name is Tyshawn Jackson.
The story that Tyshawn Jackson told, of course, is very different from the one that Luis Toledo told. He said that Luis woke him up around 6 o'clock the morning of October 23rd.
He says, well, can you drive my car as I drive my wife's car over to the neighboring county? Tyshawn knows who Luis is. They play video games together. They have a relationship. It's not just like a random out of the blue person who gets their window knocked on at 6:30 in the morning and then helps out.
Ty being Ty, yeah, I'll help you, no worries. He started thinking otherwise, like, what's going on? Why are we doing this now? And then when Ty gets back to the house, he sees the cops everywhere. And that's when he started putting 2 and 2 together, like, hey, maybe something bad happened.
Tyshawn tells us, the detectives, he says, listen, we dropped the car over at a parking lot in the neighboring county. Law enforcement go over there and they find this vehicle. The worst case scenario is that Yesenia and the kids are inside of the car. Car's cleared, there's nothing in the car, and law enforcement takes it into their possession. So as I'm interviewing Louis on day 1, and I start talking about timeline, it's very important for investigative purposes to establish timeline. When was this person last seen alive? And so I said, Louis, when's the last time that you saw your wife? And he says, well, last time I saw her, we got in an argument. It was 1-something in the morning. We were talking about our relationship.
In the midst of their argument the night before, Toledo took Yesenia's phone and messaged Kevin, the co-worker she was having an affair with.
Louis had texted him on Yesenia's phone and said, listen, hey, I can't do this anymore. We shouldn't be doing it. Louis says that after he does that, Yesenia then goes and says, Kevin, it wasn't me. I didn't write that. That was Louis. This enrages Louis because Louis is now saying, hey, we're working on a relationship here. I'm trying to make this thing better. You wanted to work on it too. I want to get this thing out in the open, and here you're undermining me. It was around 1:30-ish in the morning, and that's important for the timeline because Louis then says after this doesn't go his way, Louis is fed up with the situation, and then he voluntarily removes himself from the situation and drives away from the resident. That's what he tells me. Louis says he gets in his car and he goes and he visits his parents. I thought, okay, he got in his car, he left, and he physically went to maybe where they live or so on and so forth for himself to kind of blow off some steam or just get away from the situation. But what I learned in that conversation piece is that his parents are both deceased and that they are buried at a cemetery in Orange City, which is a neighboring city to Deltona. We continued the timeline. I said, okay, so how long do you think that you were there at the cemetery? He's like, oh, for a couple of hours. I said, okay, then what did you do? He said, well, I drove home, I parked my car in the driveway, and I fell asleep. The next thing I remember, I wake up because the sun is hitting my face. I go inside, the kids are gone, and Yesenia's gone. So when Lewis realizes that his family's not there, he just thinks that they had gone on with their daily business. So he begins to prepare himself for his day. Gets himself dressed, gets in the car, and he begins to drive himself to an appointment that he had. He gets about halfway there, and he realizes that he forgot his wallet. And so he turns around, and he comes back to the family residence in Deltona. And when he gets back, that's when Yesenia's mother, Felicita, is there. And then she begins to confront Lewis about, well, where's Yesenia? Where are the kids? They didn't go to school. I haven't been able to talk to her. You did something to them. I know that you did. According to Lewis, he's taken aback by this. I don't know where they are. I slept in my car in the driveway. I woke up. They weren't here. I went inside. I got dressed. I went and did my day. This is just as alarming to me as it is to you. I let him lay all that out. Fantastic. In my business, a lie is as good as the truth. Lewis has now told me they got in a fight.
We fight about the same stupid thing. And she's like, yeah, I want a divorce. I said, whoa, where is this coming from? She's like, I'm tired of this relationship. We're not moving forward.
He leaves. He's gone for the majority of the morning. In fact, the whole morning. He comes home. He sleeps in his car. Sun rises. He gets up. He goes inside. They're not there. What he doesn't take into consideration is that Tyshawn has now come to us and has said, I woke up this morning at 6:30 because Lewis knocked on my door, and I drove his vehicle while he, Lewis, drove his wife's. Lewis doesn't know that I know that. The perception that, again, we're on the same team, we have the same goals, what can you do to help, changes when we find out from Tyshawn that Lewis was in her car earlier that day. There's a big discrepancy in what Lewis had told me before in terms of, I was at the cemetery, I came home, I was in my car, I woke up in my car and they were gone. Forgetting to tell me that you drove her car someplace and then actually moved it and then went and talked to your neighbor and we put a car in a neighboring county and that was confirmed because we found the car over there, that's a big piece of your story that you're missing, sir.
Luis took off in his wife's car, the black Honda, and Tyshawn followed at some point in the silver Saturn, Luis Toledo's car, and ended up in the parking lot of an apartment complex in Seminole County. And when Tyshawn got there, he saw that Luis already had the car doors, the trunk open on the black Honda, and was cleaning things out, scrubbing things out. And then he saw that Luis went over to a dumpster in the apartment complex and was dropping things in. He saw a vacuum cleaner, he saw floor mats, there were children's toys, 1 or 2 boots that had belonged to Luis, all going into this dumpster. The car, the black Honda, was closed up, left behind, and the two drove off in the silver Saturn. But by now, Tyshawn is getting a little uneasy about what's going on and what he may have gotten himself into.
And so when I'm armed with this piece of information, I go back into the room and I say, Lewis, what would you say if I have a witness who told me that you were driving Yesenia's car earlier this morning? And I won't forget this. He's used the word impossible in his response.
Sources that are saying that they saw you in your wife's car this morning.
Impossible.
Now everybody knows on my side that Luis Toledo is not being 100% truthful as to what he knows. And he is person of interest number 1 as to knowing what happened that night. We conclude day 1 knowing that Luis Toledo, a former high-ranking member in a criminal gang who has a propensity for violence, is lying. And not lying a little, lying a lot.
October 2013. Luis Toledo is being questioned by the police over the disappearance of his wife, Yesenia Suarez, and her 2 children.
The purpose of our conversation was to find out where Yesenia was, where Talia was, where Michael was. As you sit in a room with a person like Luis Toledo in this type of investigation, there's a lot of pressure. Time is of the essence. You don't know, hopefully they're still alive. But as each minute goes by, are they injured? Are they in a position where if we don't get to them in time that they're not going to be able to sustain life? These are all things that you're up against.
The investigators go back to Luis Toledo with what they know. They know more. They know what the neighbor has said about helping get rid of cleaning supplies, seeing where this vacuum cleaner and all these, the floor mat, the boots had all been dumped. And he could tell investigators where to find them. And then the investigators also put pictures of his family in front of Luis Toledo. He's going to tell all now. He can't bear this burden.
And that's when he opens up and he begins to give the story. He and Yesenia had gotten in an argument, and it became clear she was either going to divorce him or move on from him. He said he separated himself from the situation. He goes outside, leaves the residence, and he sees the neighbor, Tyshawn. Luis says that he and Tyshawn come back because they were going to play video games, and this just further enrages Yesenia. So Yesenia and Luis continue to get in this altercation, this verbal altercation, which turns physical when Luis says that Yesenia somehow attacks him. Now I sit across from this man who's got a violent history and has committed violent crimes in the past. I have no idea what to expect.
She was hitting me or whatever. So I felt like she was gonna go for my face, and I went to try to grab a bush or something. So I went to tap and hit her, and she just and she fell back. I don't know, man. It was like a sudden thing, man, because it really hurt my face.
This is a man whose nickname was Semi because of the way he punched. And he always said, I would never hit them because I knew how powerful I was. And now he had done it. And here he was, aghast, looking at the body of his wife as she lay there dying.
And Tyshawn was like, what the I was like, yo, Tyshawn, she's dying, man. Yo, help me, bro. He was just dead stuck, like he didn't know what to do. So I was like, yo, she's around. I said, no, Ty, she's dead, man. She's dead. Then the kids came out because of the noise. And I was like, yo, take him, bro. Move him, please. Get him out of here. Because I didn't want them to see, you know. And then my daughter was like, hey, what do you guys do with my mom? And Sean just went back to the room with them. And then I was sitting there kissing her, and I was talking to her.
He panicked as he was there trying to help her, crying over her. He heard sounds in the background and screams, and he goes to go see what it is, and it was Ty that went and killed the two kids in the bathroom.
My kids, one was in the tub and one was in the floor. I said, Ty, what did you do? And I grabbed him, I threw him against the wall. And he was like, man, yo, I can't go back. I'm on probation. They saw us, man. You know, we killed them. I was like, no, we killed them, man. We killed my kids. I can't keep talking about it. I don't talk about it no more.
Luis Toledo was blaming Tyshawn Jackson not only for the killing of his children, but for disposing of the bodies. And that Tyshawn Jackson took the bodies away and hid them someplace and refused to tell Luis where they were. He said, it's better you don't know. But, of course, then Tyshawn Jackson contradicts that. He has just shown up and found an empty car and a lot of stuff that had been put in a dumpster. He doesn't know where the bodies are.
We're in an interview, and he's complaining of stomach issues. He said he hasn't been eating well, everything going on, the stresses and whatnot. So he asked to go to the bathroom.
I do have to pee now.
As we stand him up to go to the bathroom, he looks at me and he says, only you. And I was like, okay, all right. I told Sergeant Pagliari hey, maybe he's going to say something. Maybe this is, where he's going to just spill the beans, but he doesn't feel comfortable doing it right there. The plan was we were going to take him to the bathroom, which is right behind the interview rooms. I had a recorder on me, and I was also going to have the other investigators follow me to where they can stand at the edge of the hallway. They can hear, but he can't see them. We walked around, we went into the bathroom, and he didn't have to go to the bathroom. He sits down on the toilet that was closed, and he's handcuffed. He's looking at me, the door's open, and I'm in the hallway, and Semi's on the toilet facing me. And he's like, hey, where's your recorder? And I was like, why do you need to know where my recorder is? He said, let me see your recorder. So I take my recorder out, and he said, throw it down the hallway. So I tried to be slick. I tried to slide it on the carpet, and of course it catches, rolls, batteries fall out, and we're like, of course. But yet I still had two detectives that were 6 feet away from me in case he tried to do something. I don't know what his state of mind is right now. He knows he killed his wife and two kids, so maybe this is an escape attempt. And he asked me if I can take him back to the house. And I was like, what do you want to go back to the house for? I was hoping he was going to tell me, well, I want you to take me there. I'm going to show you where the kids are. So I was like, what do you want me to take you back to the house for? Now I'm talking a little bit louder so the guys can hear me, right? And he's like, no, shh, quiet down. And I was like, okay, why? Why do you want me to go back to the house? And he's like, well, I want you to take me back to the house. You're gonna make the cuffs loose. And then when you make the cuffs loose, I'm gonna slip out of the cuffs, and then I'm gonna make you guys, one of the deputies, kill me. He's like, I wanna die where my kids died. And I was like, that's not gonna happen. That's not gonna happen. And at this point, I started getting louder again, and I started ending the conversation because he's thinking of suicide. I tell him, hey, that's not gonna happen. That's not gonna happen. Just tell me where the bodies are. And he proceeds to say, I'm never gonna tell you where the bodies are.
And all of a sudden, this man who says that his friend had disposed of the bodies, and in order to protect him, Luis said, you'll never tell. I'm not gonna tell you where the bodies are. You shouldn't know. Luis Toledo himself says, I'll never tell you where the bodies are. Then came that moment that homicide investigators look for, which is that he cracked. He goes into the bathroom again and locks the door. Then he smashes the mirror in the bathroom.
We hear glass breaking. Now inside the bathroom was a sink and a mirror, and so we know probably what he's doing. He's breaking the glass. We need to get in there. What's he gonna do? Is he, the intentions are most likely for him to hurt himself, maybe commit suicide.
The police try to get into the bathroom and they can't break in. Finally, they have to bring some kind of a ram to break holes in the door of the bathroom, use a taser through those doors, finally, to take Luis Toledo down and get him out.
Clearly a suicide attempt. So clearly he had no intention of telling us where they are. He knows where they are, and now he's gonna go in there and he's gonna go to his grave knowing that he is the only person that can ever tell anybody who these people are.
He's getting desperate now. He knows we're onto him. He's thinking suicide. He's looking at all options. So, now we got to start stepping back and start thinking a little bit more about this.
October 2013. Upon being questioned over the disappearance of his wife, Yesenia Suarez, and her 2 young children, Luis Toledo confesses that in a moment of rage following an argument, he unintentionally murdered his wife. But he blames his neighbor, Tyshawn Jackson, for the death of the children and the disappearance of all 3 victims' bodies.
I said, "What did you do?" And I grabbed him and I threw him against the wall. And I was saying, like, killed him, man. He killed my kids.
However, the investigators are not convinced that Tyshawn was involved.
The story that he tells is so bizarre that they sense from the outset that this is all made up.
The story was that he struck the wife, and then Ty was behind him and killed the 2 kids because he didn't want to go back to jail, and it just didn't line up. There was no reason for Ty to kill the kids. Ty was one of the first ones that brought this to the police's attention, so he had no reason to lie. Semi tried to say, well, Ty's a bad guy. He didn't want to go back to jail. This is why he did it.
He was like, man, yo, I can't go back. I'm on probation. They saw us, man. We killed them.
But that's the farthest from the truth. Ty was on probation for very, small crimes. He was trying to make something out of himself. He was trying to get back to being a modern citizen, it didn't make sense on why Ty would do any of this. Exactly what his story was is what happened. Toledo, he is very intelligent. He knows the best story is to say what exactly happened, but he's gonna move around who did what to protect himself. So everything he said Ty did, he did. But it was easier for him to tell a story and remember that story by telling the truth, but using somebody else as the actual fall guy.
With the investigators believing that Luis Toledo is the sole perpetrator in this case, he must now face the charges.
Now, the charges he faced were second-degree murder for his wife, but first-degree murder for the children. The thinking was that second-degree murder is a crime a bit more of the moment, not planned out, a crime of passion.
It was a out of rage killing. Jealousy led to this.
And the kids heard this, came out, saw what was going on, and that Luis had killed them The children had nothing to do with it. They were 9 years old and 8 years old. They were born 10 months apart. They were his stepchildren. He'd lived with them. He'd taken them to school. He'd fixed their lunches. And the idea that he had killed them was beyond his ability to acknowledge. His old gang code with the Latin Kings said, never, ever hurt kids.
So if he were to confess to killing the kids, he would be held liable by the Latin Kings, and he would have to deal with it on that side as well as the criminal side.
3 years after the murders, the trial begins.
I had to be there and make justice for my daughter and my grandkids. It was very hard. I tried not to even look at him.
We hear from Tyshawn Jackson, telling again the story that he had been the fall guy. We heard from Kevin Dredden, who had been the lover of Yesenia, talking about how he had been threatened by Luis himself, that Luis was already prone to this kind of violence and was angered by their relationship. Luis Toledo himself did not take the stand to tell his story. It was left to others. Luis Toledo's defense attorney stuck pretty much to the first version of the story that Luis had told, that yes, he killed his wife in a fit of rage. He was strong, his hands were dangerous, he'd promised he would never use them on her, but he just snapped. Those were the words he used to Tyshawn Jackson too. Just snapped. Clearly there were a lot of hurdles for the prosecution in this. You had a few drops of blood, you had cleaning products, a floor mat of a car, a boot, and that was pretty much it. What do you do with a case like that where you don't even have the bodies? You can't say how they died. You can't really say authoritatively when they died. You can just say that they disappeared.
No victim, no crime. And in here, we didn't have 3 victims. They were missing.
It was really a challenge, but prosecutors turned it around and said that the lack of bodies showed the additional callousness that not only could Luis Toledo kill them, but he could move them somewhere and get rid of them cold-bloodedly. Even though there wasn't much in the way of physical evidence as far as the bodies were concerned, there were the text messages to and from Luis and Yesenia, and to and from Yesenia and Kevin, her lover. And remember that Luis had access to all of this because he'd put spy software in the phone. So the mounting anger and frustration, the questioning of Yesenia, and her response, admitting that she had finally, yes, I had made a mistake. The message with Kevin from the actual day that Luis came to the office, the message between Kevin and Yesenia about when they would be getting together again. All of this was accessible to Luis, and all of it was shown to the jury as well.
I know the judge addressed it once where he's throwing Latin King signs up during court.
Law enforcement noticed it and thought, are these gang signals? Because, of course, he had been in the Latin Kings gang. Was this a signal of where the bodies might be found in order to get rid of them in case anybody did find them and try to bring them in as evidence during the trial? There was really a lot of puzzlement over this. And so law enforcement and other people who know about these things finally deciphered these hand gestures, and they meant, just go ahead, do it. What was Luis Toledo saying with this? Was he saying, just go ahead and convict me? Just go ahead and sentence me to death?
So for trial purposes, what they wanted to do was play all of his interview. Jurors are looking at the entire courtroom. How is the defendant reacting to this, especially when you play the tape of the interview and he goes into detail how he kills his wife and these 2 kids are killed. As a juror, not only am I fixated on what's on the screen, but I also want to turn my attention to the accused. How are they reacting? He sat there emotionless, but you got to consider, is that part of the con? He's the guy that wants you to believe everything he's going to say, that he didn't do anything wrong. He justifies killing the wife because the wife did him wrong. He's a cold-blooded killer.
When the case finally went to the jury, it was about 9:30 in the morning, a jury of 9 women and 3 men. And they deliberated about 8 hours before they delivered their verdict on that same day. And it was guilty on all counts. 2nd-degree murder in the death of Yesenia Suarez, and 1st-degree murder in the deaths of Talia and Michael Otto, the children.
Which was a huge win for the prosecution and for everyone that investigated this case, because we didn't have the bodies. Without bodies, it's hard to prove an act. It's especially hard to prove a 1st-degree murder. And the jury came out and was able to see through Semi, his story, and be able to come out with a guilty verdict, thankfully.
In this case, the jury considered, and even though it voted 10-2 in favor of the death penalty, that decision has to be unanimous. And therefore, Luis Toledo was sentenced to life in prison without parole for each of these murders consecutively, not concurrently, to be served one after the other after the other.
Luis Toledo, he is a jealous possessive who will never tell where those bodies are because he wants to possess them. He enjoys seeing that the family and friends and everyone beside themselves, and that's just his last way of sticking it to Yesenia. He says that he loved her, but he hated her so much. He hated the fact that she cheated on him, that it drove him to this rage where he killed her, killed the kids, and as a last insult to her, he just will never tell anybody where they are.
The search for those children and Yesenia really was uniting the community in a terrible and fearful way. They wanted to find the bodies, but they dreaded finding the bodies. And what was even worse turned out to be not finding the bodies. The family could not believe they were dead. The police were saying they're dead. And the family said, we won't know that without the bodies. They wanted the proof. We often hear that phrase, closure, that people, when their loved ones are believed to be dead, they want the physical evidence to know, and they want to be able to say goodbye to that part of that person that they knew and loved. In this case, there was nothing. In spite of this large hunt, police were there, investigators were there, volunteers were there, news crews were covering this assiduously, and yet nothing ever turned up.
I would love to say to him that, please just give me my family and let me put them in rest, where they're supposed to be, because some people say, Mavi, they're alive. I said, I know my family is not alive. I just want them home to put them in rest.
Enjoy your own worries. I miss you forever. Can't forget. The nostalgia is gentle and very gentle. I sincerely wish we could be together. There are times when sadness is like ice and snow, when we parted right. From the moment I fell in love with you, opened my heart, I see life as how I added the remaining like a bright red rose, always fragrant and seductive. I see you coming back in my sleep. The nostalgia's overflowing, it cannot be quenched. The nostalgia is gentle and very gentle. A nostalgia is gentle and very gentle. The nostalgia is gentle and very gentle. The nostalgia is gentle and cannot be quenched. Oh.
Past, looking at the body of his wife as she lay there dying.
Tyshawn was like, what the I was like, yo, Tyshawn, she's dying, man. Yo, help me, bro. He was just dead stuck, like he didn't know what to do. So I was like, yo, she's around. I said, no, Ty, she's dead, man. She's dead. Then the kids came out because of the noise. And I was like, yo, take him, bro. Move, please, get him out of here. Because I didn't want them to see, you know. And then my daughter was like, hey, what do you guys do to my mom? Tyshawn just went back to the room with them. And then I was sitting there kissing her, and I was talking to her.
He panicked as he was there trying to help her, crying over her. He heard sounds in the background and screams, and he goes to go see what it is, and it was Ty that went and killed the two kids in the bathroom.
My kids, one was in the tub and one was in the floor. I said, Ty, what the did you do? And I grabbed him, I threw him against the wall. And he was like, man, yo, I can't go back. I'm on probation. They saw us, man. You know, we killed them. I was like, no, we killed them, man. You killed my kids. I can't keep talking about it. I don't talk about it no more.
Luis Toledo was blaming Tyshawn Jackson not only for the killing of his children, but for disposing of the bodies. And that Tyshawn Jackson took the bodies away and hid them someplace and refused to tell Luis where they were. He said, it's better you don't know. But, of course, then Tyshawn Jackson contradicts that. He has just shown up and found an empty car and a lot of stuff that had been put in a dumpster. He doesn't know where the bodies are.
We're in an interview, and he's complaining of stomach issues. He said he hasn't been eating well, everything going on, the stresses and whatnot. So he asked to go to the bathroom. As we stand him up to go to the bathroom, he looks at me and he says, only you. And I was like, okay, all right. I told Sergeant Pagliari hey, maybe he's going to say something. Maybe this is, you know, where he's going to just spill the beans, but he doesn't feel comfortable doing it right there. The plan was we were going to take him to the bathroom, which is right behind the interview rooms. I had a recorder on me, and I was also going to have the other investigators follow me to where they can stand at the edge of the hallway. They can hear, but he can't see them. We walked around, we went into the bathroom, and he didn't have to go to the bathroom. He sits down on the toilet that was closed, and he's handcuffed. He's looking at me, the door's open, and I'm in the hallway, and Semi's on the toilet facing me. And he's like, hey, where's your recorder? And I was like, why do you need to know where my recorder is? He said, let me see your recorder. So I take my recorder out, and he said, throw it down the hallway. So I tried to be slick. I tried to slide it on the carpet, and of course it catches, rolls, batteries fall out, and we're like, of course. But yet I still had two detectives that were 6 feet away from me in case he tried to do something. I don't know what his state of mind is right now. He knows he killed his wife and two kids, so maybe this is an escape attempt. And he asked me if I can take him back to the house. And I was like, what do you want to go back to the house for? I was hoping he was going to tell me, well, I want you to take me there. I'm going to show you where the kids are. So I was like, what do you want me to take you back to the house for? Now I'm talking a little bit louder so the guys can hear me, right? And he's like, no, shh, quiet down. And I was like, okay, why? Why do you want me to go back to the house? And he's like, well, I want you to take me back to the house. You're going to make the cuffs loose. And then when you make the cuffs loose, I'm going to slip out of the cuffs, and then I'm going to make you guys, one of the deputies, kill me. He's like, I want to die where my kids died. And I was like, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. And at this point, I started getting louder again, and I started ending the conversation because he's thinking of suicide. I tell him, hey, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. Just tell me where the bodies are. And he proceeds to say, I'm never going to tell you where the bodies are.
And all of a sudden, this man who says that his friend had disposed of the body
In Texas, several young women have vanished without trace, only to later be found murdered in chillingly disturbing ways.
We're not talking about someone walking, in the dark, after hours. We're talking about the middle of the day.
The method of their murder suggests a psychopath is on the loose.
He seemed to take pride, a sick kind of pride in his killing and in his technique with the tourniquet.
As the tourniquet killer grips the headlines, detectives race against time to unmask the predator haunting the community. Every lead slips through their fingers.
The master of lying and secrets and disguises.
When an unassuming telephone repairman is brought in for questioning about an unrelated crime, will a chilling discovery turn the investigation on its head?
He had to submit DNA as a result of now being a convicted sex offender.
Science like DNA has revolutionized criminal justice in my lifetime.
I didn't set out to kill her. That was not my intent.
Detectives piece together the evidence, slowly uncovering the face of a suspect. Which clue will expose the truth? What will be a killer's mistake? Police in Houston, Texas receive a report that 9-year-old Diana Rabola is missing. She's last seen at a grocery store just a few blocks from her home in Houston Heights. Andy Kahn, collaborating with the Houston Police Department, is urgently brought in to serve as the critical link between law enforcement and a deeply concerned family.
I was involved almost immediately with the Diana Rabola case. And here's somebody that's just walking down the street, buying a few items to take home for a family dinner. And boom.
2 days later, Diana's body is discovered on the loading dock of an abandoned building.
She was sexually assaulted, beaten, and then strangled.
She is found laying face up, a tourniquet wrapped tightly around her neck.
It's just unconscionable that someone can do this to a 9-year-old in the middle of the day. We're not talking about some isolated area. This is a populated part of the town. That's pretty brazen.
Detectives have encountered this chilling method of killing before. Diana's brutal murder bears an unsettling resemblance to another recent homicide. 2 years earlier, police discovered the body of 21-year-old Maria del Carmen Estrada in a parking lot behind a Dairy Queen in the Spring Branch neighborhood of Houston.
Maria was, a hard worker, trying to help her family, just taking public transportation to and from her work and just helping her family just go about life. And here she was again, vulnerable, by herself, no one else around. Seizing that opportunity, the killer abducts her, rapes her, kills her in excruciating slow fashion, and then dumps her.
Like Diana, Maria is found with a handmade tourniquet wrapped around her neck. District Attorney Kim Ogg is an assistant prosecutor in Harris County at the time. She's tasked with analyzing critical crime scene evidence.
When I'd worked in the Special Crimes Division of the Harris County District Attorney's Office, there were a series of crimes involving a signature mark, a tourniquet left on the bodies, which came across my desk. They were brought by homicide investigators who were working the cases, trying to figure out the whodunit.
The similarities between Diana and Maria, the time between deaths, and the method of murder lead investigators to fear they may be dealing with a serial killer.
The tourniquet takes your fingers off the pulse, literally, but it gave the killer the ability to turn life on and off.
He had a profile. We see that he's attacking younger Hispanic women, young girls.
This is so methodically calculated as to how he picked his victims. These were young girls from the ages of 9 to 21, not doing anything wrong.
Who is responsible? Police need to build a profile of the killer. They focus on the locations of his attacks, centered in those Houston neighborhoods increasingly home to Latin American immigrants.
The neighborhoods in Houston were changing in the late 80s and 90s. They were going dramatically downhill in certain areas. Part of it was we had an immigrant population, very low on the socioeconomic scale, many times, many of them not citizens of the country. And so that created an opportunity for a serial killer who was looking for people who he could grab, rape, kill, and who might not be missed.
The one common denominator his victims had, besides being young, were they were by themselves. And little did they know that how vulnerable that made them to a sadistic predator.
I felt like it was only a matter of time before the next body would show up. That gumshoe detective work was applied.
They were able to extract DNA from Maria Estrada's fingernails.
Could DNA found under Maria's fingertips be a killer's mistake? In 1992, CODIS, a combined DNA index system that links profiles across jurisdictions in different parts of the United States, is still in its infancy. No connections are found.
There was no general testing of DNA.
You had problems in crime labs, and all sorts of Murphy's Law was going on with so many different entities as far as getting a match.
Investigators carefully preserve the DNA found under Maria's fingernails, knowing forensic science and databases are advancing rapidly. They hold on to the evidence, hoping for the day that her killer slips up and reveals his identity.
Looking for a serial murder was like looking for a needle in a haystack. And so the DNA evidence was collected.
Detectives believe the killer has a clear profile for his victims. Now they're building one for him, knowing that to catch him, they must first understand him.
The way he would kill his victims shows you his true colors and his insatiable need to seek attention.
I think a master of lying and secrets and disguises and things that covered his trail.
Dr. Judy Ho, a renowned forensic neuropsychologist, highlights the critical importance of building a psychological profile to unmask the killer.
I think that there was a couple of components to this. One is very poor impulse control, so he just did whatever he felt like. But the other piece of it is that he probably derived some kind of sick joy from dominating people who were vulnerable. Notice that he doesn't necessarily dominate people who were his size. He's not picking on people who were his own size. And so he's looking for victims that he would clearly be declared the winner. It was rigged from the start.
Without any other objective evidence, police might never have been able to find the correct killer.
Investigators need forensic evidence, but the science and database technology isn't advanced enough to deliver results. Police receive a call about a missing teenager, Dana Sanchez. She is last seen leaving her home, only to vanish without trace.
Again, 16-year-old teenager. middle of the day, minding her own business, not doing anything wrong, not doing anything illegal, just doing what teenage girls do, you know?
A week goes by with no leads in Dana's disappearance until a local news station receives an anonymous call from someone claiming to be her killer.
He has the audacity to contact a local news station and tip them off as to where the body could be found, just so he can make sure that he got credit for the latest murder in his own mind. That's mine.
The caller claims to be Dana Sanchez's killer.
He basically was telling the media that, yeah, there's a serial killer roaming loose out there, killing young girls, and you need to be aware of that.
When a local news station in Houston receives an anonymous call from a person who claims that he's a serial killer, police have to take it seriously.
To contact a local news station and tip them off as to where the body could be found. You can actually visualize him at home in front of the television waiting for the local news to capture the story of what he did, and him just salivating.
Looking for any clue in their search for 16-year-old Dana Sanchez, police arrive at a barren field on the outskirts of the city, and Dana's lifeless body lies sprawled, decomposing in the dirt.
She was tortured and just dumped like the rest of them. Someone that can do that without any care in the world and just leave her out there just to rot. It's about the lowest of the low you could possibly imagine of a life form in this universe.
Still wrapped around Dana Sanchez's neck is the murder weapon, a tourniquet.
Dana Sanchez was a bit older, 16 years old. The MO is the same, he strangled her. We don't know much more else. We can assume she was probably sexually assaulted. What we do know is that a victim profile for sure has emerged.
The third young Hispanic woman strangled with a tourniquet in 3 years confirms investigators' fears. The suspected killer's call to a local news station leaves detectives fearing they're being lured into a dangerous game of cat and mouse.
He seemed to take pride, a sick kind of pride in his killing and in his technique with the tourniquet. It worked for him. It was his signature. And it distinguished him from other individuals who kill people with their bare hands.
Investigators have 3 victims, each with the murder weapon left at the scene. With no other clues to identify the killer, the case captures national attention. The media dubs the unknown predator the tourniquet killer, thrusting him into the spotlight.
Notoriety and fame that serial killers want and then ultimately achieve, and then all of a sudden you're a household name, your name's in the paper, your name's on the news. He so desperately wanted that.
The ensuing media frenzy may have been just what he wanted, but the pressure is on police to catch the killer.
Nobody could find anything.
For 3 years, police strive to make gains in identifying the tourniquet killer. They analyze the anonymous call made to the local news station. They look for further links between cases and meticulously gather forensic evidence. When a local telephone repairman is questioned by police for an unrelated crime, detectives see no reason to suspect a link to the elusive tourniquet killer.
Here's a guy that worked for the phone company, telephone company, Southwestern Bell, as a repairman.
Maybe you wouldn't suspect a family man that seemed happy in his marriage and in his family life.
His name is Anthony Shaw, and he is suspected of committing an horrific crime.
All of a sudden, Anthony Shaw does a despicable act when he sexually abuses and assaults his 2 young daughters. They make an outcry. He's arrested.
He raped his daughters, and his daughter's outcry spurred his arrest.
The repairman accused of sexually abusing his own children is 36-year-old Anthony Shaw. Investigators who are hopeful of convicting him for crimes against his own children search for any evidence from his past. What had made him such a monster?
A few things stand out for me about Shaw's early life, right? He's very precocious. He's already sort of making, 4 or 5-year-old what could be construed as sexual advances towards these little girls.
One of the biggest red flags was that you would actually torture animals at a young age. It shows a level of lack of empathy, lack of emotionality.
There was something going on with his sister as well, okay? Apparently he had stabbed her in the head with a screwdriver. And we know again also from later reports that she didn't seem to be very empathetic towards him as well. Shaw used his sister to lure girls in the neighborhood back to, his house, or to grope them, to kiss them.
I think he instilled fear in his own sisters. And I think there was a part of his sisters that probably feared for themselves. They didn't do what he asked. And even though they knew that this couldn't lead to anything good, they were manipulated by him. And they were doing so possibly out of their own self-protection.
While investigating Shaw for sexual abuse of his own children, detectives hear from friends and neighbors that he appeared ordinary.
For a while, Shaw had a normal life. In addition to working at a regular job during the day, in the evening he performed the piano. So he was, he was known amongst people who went and attended live music functions as well. There's some people that worked for the phone company astonished, and they were dumbfounded. They said, I worked with him. I know him. I went to lunch with Anthony. Sure. I can't believe that's him. He was so nice, such a normal guy.
Anthony Shaw seemed like a happily married man.
I do have to wonder about the true nature of that relationship. Did he really get married because he had genuine affection for this person, or was she basically used as a pawn in his game?
That's part of the facade that they try to maintain. That's kind of like their Jekyll and Hyde ego that they like to have. Is there some sort of normalcy where no one suspects anything?
We could see that from when Anthony was a child, from the torturing and killing of innocent animals to putting a screwdriver through his sister's head. So sadly, it's no surprise that he would definitely abuse his own family members as well.
It takes investigators 1 year to build a case against Shaw for the abuse of his own daughters.
So Anthony Shaw is convicted in 1998 of molesting his 2 daughters.
He's put on probation like many sex offenders are, particularly on your first offense, so that's not a surprise. He was put on probation. But the catch was he had to submit DNA as a result of now being a convicted sex offender.
When detectives confirm a match, they are stunned to discover that the assault on his family was just one piece of Shaw's larger web of horrific crimes.
And this is the turning point in the case.
Five years after his conviction for the abuse of his own daughters, the combined DNA index system, CODIS, established by the FBI, allows law enforcement agencies to share and compare DNA profiles across jurisdictions.
Because the laws had changed and DNA samples could and were taken from individuals charged with certain crimes, his sample was entered into CODIS, the national system for matching DNA to known individuals or unknown individuals.
When detectives check Anthony Shaw's DNA against unsolved crimes on the CODIS network, it reveals a match they'd been looking for 8 years.
The DNA was then ultimately matched from Estrada's fingernails.
6 years into an 8-year sentence of probation for indecency with a child, and 11 years since Maria del Carmen Estrada's murder, investigators in Houston arrest telephone repairman Anthony Shaw.
There wasn't anything to link him with the murders until you were able to run his DNA.
Police are confident that whoever killed Maria del Carmen Estrada is also responsible for killing Diana Rabola and Dana Sanchez. But with no DNA available from the scene of those crimes, detectives decide to confront Anthony Shaw in an interview. Detectives gear up for a high-stakes showdown and interrogation, hoping it will be the key to breaking the case wide open. As the interview begins, Shaw sits down and calmly presents his version of events, while the officers tread carefully, uncertain of what lies ahead.
And I ran across this really a beautiful young lady. I forget her right. She turned me down. But she was on my way to work taking me.
Shaw initially admits to officers that he did meet Maria del Carmen Estrada on the day that she went missing.
One day it was misting rain. She saw me, asked me for a ride. It was going places. She was talking about, yeah, she wanted to go out. Well, we pulled in. Yeah, Dairy Queen. They're all rescue? Yeah, all rescue. And it was going okay. She was amenable to a kiss.
Listening to Shaw recount these events, I don't hear the self-absorbed narcissist that people might attribute to him. I hear someone telling a story very matter-of-factly, all right? It lacks empathy, right? But it's not embellished.
Oh, and I pushed her further. It got out of hand. She opened her glass and she was resisting. When I had this sleep consumption, not like voices in my head, but just driven, that I was going to have her regardless. I don't know what the hell you call it. I've tried to understand this, but I wanted to possess her somehow. She became real violent, just finally wanting to get out of the car.
Detectives brace themselves as Anthony Shaw begins to talk, and then talk some more. What he says next will change the entire course of the investigation.
I didn't set out to kill her. That was not my intent. But it got out of hand. I strangled her.
Detectives are stunned by Shaw's chilling honesty. The interview takes a dramatic turn as he begins what appears to be a confession, claiming he strangled Maria del Carmen Estrada.
When he was interviewed by law enforcement, there did seem to be a desire to clear his conscience.
Officers, keeping calm as Shaw confesses to murder, are blindsided by a new revelation. In 1993, 14-year-old Selma, a name used as a pseudonym to protect her identity, suffers a brutal attack. Is another mystery about to be solved?
I'm guessing she was probably 16, 17 at the time. I'm not really sure how old. She was young, she was attractive. She was a latchkey kid coming home from high school or whatever school she was going to. So I had broken into the house, which means the door was unlocked, and I waited for her to get there.
So the living rape victim was a young person whose house he surveilled for several days. Shaw was a telephone lineman. He had access to every neighborhood in Houston.
You can basically spy on so many different people throughout the day.
He had a reason to be there. He had a marked vehicle. It made it totally easy for him to just look for victims and exercise his demon.
And I wanted to prove to myself that I didn't have to take a life and tie her up with electrical cord and raped her.
I didn't know of her existence when I worked on Deanna's case and on Carmen's case in the early 90s until he admitted to them a decade later, after he was already caught and his DNA identified and matched.
Shaw holds back from taking Salma's life, but he confesses to detectives his insatiable urge to kill will ultimately become unstoppable.
Strangely, she fought like hell. I mean, just wouldn't go along with anything.
The details he provides about the targeting of 9-year-old Diana Rabola are devastating.
And she was so afraid, I'm sure that I don't recall what type of cord or string or piece of wire or something. And did the same thing. I know it, but I don't know why. It kept happening. I couldn't stop it.
I think Anthony Shore wants to be a paradox to the country. Yet on one hand, he wants credit for these brutal rapes and murders and anything else he wants. Yet at the same time, he wants everybody to know how sorry he was and please ask for my forgiveness and so forth. You know what? That day's long gone. You blew that.
For detectives tasked with proving the case against him, Shaw's confessions are a treasure trove, and he's far from finished. As he keeps talking, he unveils chilling details about how he crossed paths with Dana Sanchez in 1995.
I was making a corner, I just said, hey, if you love, go ahead. She says, man, I'm going to see my boyfriend somewhere. I forget where she told me. I said, no problem. Jump right in.
He's going to younger girls to comfort himself, okay? If he starts actually now talking to this girl and confiding in her, it's probably because he knows that older women would think him strange, right? Younger girl is going to listen.
I was flirting with her heavily. That time I had really long hair. She was jokingly, no, I've got a boyfriend, this and that. So I grabbed her, pulled her into the back of the van. I knew there was nothing I could do to get out of this. And I used a ligature in my oiler. I want to say it was a yellow, twisted nylon rope, but I don't remember which one.
The profile of Shore's victim resembles very much the little girls he used to entice over to his house vis-a-vis his sister. Shore is on his way back to childhood.
I pulled her out into a field and left like a bat out of hell, scared to death. Do you know how her body got found? Yes, I do. What? An anonymous phone call. And who made that phone call? I did.
Shaw admits the anonymous tip that led investigators to Dana Sanchez's body came from Shaw himself.
When Dana's not found, I guess, I gotta get some sort of attention. Someone's got to know about it. Anthony Shore, obviously was in tune with the news of what he had done, and evidently, since nobody knew, particularly the media, nobody was broadcasting to the world, particularly local news, wasn't telling anybody about the latest murder. He certainly wanted credit, wanted to be known.
In Texas, full disclosure can lead to plea deals, even in cases involving serial killers. If Shaw is trying to avoid death row, his chilling arrogance suggests he won't succeed. He seems to take a twisted pride in recounting his crimes. He then delivers yet another shocking revelation.
Anthony had another victim.
It's unfathomable what happened to her, and she was the first.
She started freaking out, and I begged her. I said, please stop. Do this. Let me just give you a ride. She's like, no. I freaked out. I don't know what came over me.
Anthony Shaw reveals that 6 years before killing Maria del Carmen Estrada, there's another victim.
Lori's case was in 1986.
Lori's 14 years old. I mean, think about your children. who are 14 years old. I mean, it's unfathomable what happened to her.
Laurie Tremblay was full of life, bright, happy, deeply loved, but oblivious to the danger that she faced if coming into contact with Anthony Shaw.
Laurie was walking to school, doing what thousands and millions of youngsters do every day.
One morning, this girl comes up and asks me for a cigarette while I was at the stoplight. I asked if she needed a ride, and I gave her a ride. And a couple days went by. She saw me. I gave her a ride again to school. She and I became involved just in the sense of kissing. Hello, goodbye. I started giving her a ride on a semi-regular basis.
He keeps returning and develops this very strange relationship with a much younger girl, which is not outside his modus operandi if you consider his daughters, and starts to confide in her, right? And she listens to him. He decides to up the ante, and wants to kiss, wants to take it further.
One day it was misting rain. She saw me and asked me for a ride, and I wanted to get more involved in just the kissing and stuff, and undid her bra. Everything got out of hand. She freaked out, and we got into a fight.
As Shaw speaks, the revelations come thick and fast. Details that would have stayed hidden if not for the DNA breakthrough that shattered the case wide open. The officers listen intently, piecing together the chilling truth that he's finally laying bare.
This one freaked out, threatened to tell, and that was the stress that it created that, unempathetic, low impulse. Everything was just on super drive.
I tried to knock her out because I just really freaked out. It's not right. I'm not justifying it. It's hard to talk about. I took this cotton cord and I tried to make sure that she would never ever tell anybody, even though I knew that was insane.
He tells investigators he didn't use his signature tourniquet on Laurie. He says that his trademark killing method was adopted after an accident during her murder.
So Shaw changes his MO and uses this tourniquet because he claims that he injured his finger while murdering Laurie Lee Tremblay with his own bare hands.
Shaw claims to have callously dumped Laurie's body behind a Mexican restaurant before returning to work. And that same evening, he performs piano at a local jazz club.
That's how serial killers operate. They blend in, so they remain anonymous, so they don't tip off that there's anything wrong with them.
If detectives accept Shaw's claims of full disclosure, Laurie Tremblay emerges as his first murder victim.
Six to 7 years passed between his rape and strangulation of Laurie Lee Tremblay in 1986 and his rape and strangulation of Maria del Carmen Estrada in 1992. This is suggestive of that cooling off period that the FBI developed many years ago, right? Serial killers, 2 to 3 victims, at least over a period of time with a cooling off period.
Investigators' research tells them many serial killers follow a pattern known as the killing cycle, which typically progresses through 7 distinct phases.
In the first phase, there's this aura phase where you start to withdraw from society. And then you begin to troll your victim, right? We're all familiar with that term now, thanks to social media. Then there's this flirting phase, phase 3. Phase 4 is when you capture the victim. Phase 5 is when you murder them. 6 is when you take something of theirs, a totem or a trophy, which I prefer. And then 7 is depression. 7 is what, so this 6-year period, he is undergoing some sort of catharsis, some sort of chrysalis phase. And he's going to come back with a vengeance.
Despite Shaw confessing to 4 murders and a sexual assault, he has not been tried. Detectives focus on charging him with Maria del Carmen Estrada's killing, backed by the strongest forensic evidence. Held without bail, investigators intensify their efforts to verify his chilling claims.
Just going through the evidence, working hard, interviewing people.
Investigators build a case based on DNA evidence, Shaw's confessions, and the modus operandi of the Tourniquet killer. In October 2004, Shaw appears at the District Court of Harris County, charged with the murders of Lori Tremblay, Maria del Carmen Estrada, Diana Rabola, and Dana Sanchez. He pleads guilty.
Sometimes we do see, on very rare occasions, somebody who truly feels like they are born evil, and I believe that that's Anthony.
In hindsight, we see red flags. At a very early age, the starting of a recipe for a serial killer.
On November 15, 2004, a jury sentences Anthony Shaw to death by execution.
The people whose children and family members were murdered are broken from the crimes of Anthony Shaw. And there's really nothing that we in the system can do to fix what happened to them. But I do believe that by finishing the case and asking that the sentence be carried out, that at least they can move on. And there are no future dates for them to have to worry about. No more court appearances, no last-minute appeals. It's finally over for the justice system. Of course, the pain that's caused those victims is never over.
District Attorney Kim Ogg becomes responsible for scheduling Shaw's execution.
When I became the Harris County District Attorney, my prior relationship with Anthony Shaw, our paths crossed again all these years later. And it became my duty to schedule executions of people who had already received the death penalty. Shaw's name was on the list. And because of the age of the case, the overwhelming evidence, the fact that I knew Shaw's work, I felt it was appropriate that he be the next in line for execution.
But as his execution date looms, the now bald Shaw delivers yet another shocking confession that leaves investigators reeling.
He comes forward with these 11th hour confessions to buy himself time. Could have been seeking to extend his own life. He bragged about up to, I think, 60 additional rapes.
I learned that there were, according to him, many other rape victims. We've only learned that as his death date approached. And that he considered it an accomplishment to be able to rape women without murdering them. And so he confessed to a number of alleged rapes that he said he committed on women that he met in social settings or bars, where he would slip them Rohypnol, the date rape drug, take them to his van, rape them, sometimes sell them to others, and then deliver them back, supposedly without them knowing what had happened to them.
Where I knew we weren't through with him. So it wasn't surprising to me that after he was executed, all of a sudden we find out he was claiming 60 some odd sexual assaults, rapes, and any other horrific offenses.
Law enforcement will look at the claims that he made, and we'll go back and look for old cases. I would hope that anyone watching this who came into contact with Shaw and who felt like they might have been violated, whether the statutes run or not, whether it was ever reported, I hope they'll let law enforcement know.
On January 18th, 2018, 55-year-old Anthony Shaw is executed by lethal injection.
I don't think we're ever going to know what was going through Anthony Shaw's mind at the time of his death, but I don't see how it couldn't have been the faces of his victims.
I can tell you from being up in Huntsville the day of the execution with the victims' families, unequivocally, Anthony Allen Shaw's reign of terror ended that day for them, and justice was carried out.
We're rethinking the death penalty all over America. I think Americans are evolving in the way we look at it. I know that I am. But when you look at a guy like Anthony Shore, in my 30 years, he is the worst of the worst. And as long as the law exists, unfortunately, there are going to be individuals like Shore. But he earned his way to the top of the list on Texas's death row.
There's a reason we have the death penalty in the state of Texas. And Anthony Allen Shore is numero uno why we have it.
Well, there's a lot we can learn from Anthony Shore. In looking at people, we can't tell. No one can tell who's a murderer and who's not. I think that we have to support science and technology in and applied to criminal justice. We should never get away from the basics as law enforcement and prosecutors, but that science like DNA has revolutionized criminal justice in my lifetime.
I vividly will never forget Anthony Allen Shore and the murders of Maria, Dana, Diana, and Lori. I think if anything you're going to take away from this is never assume if you're out walking by yourself that you're not going to be targeted or you're not going to be a victim. Because like it or not, there's Anthony Allen Shores walking and living amongst us today. That's the sad reality. They are your next door neighbors, they're your coworkers, they're your friends, your business partners, people you recreate with, people you go out to dinner with. You just don't know. And he's living proof of that.
When Anthony Shore claimed the lives of his victims, he believed his crimes would remain buried in the shadows, beyond the reach of justice. But what Shore didn't count on were the leaps in science and forensic technology that would one day catch up with him.
His daughter's outcry spurred his arrest, which led to the DNA sample being taken from him because he was convicted. And when his sample was entered into the CODIS database, it matched.
What he did to his two daughters ends up solving the murders of the 4 young girls, because if he hadn't committed those atrocities, the abuses on his daughters, who knows if it would have ever been solved.
Leaving a trail of forensic evidence that connected his horrific crimes against his children to a series of murders was a killer's mistake.